Imagine standing over your mother's grave, not with tears in your eyes, but with 20 years of scars carved into your heart. 4 years she belittled her daughters, favored her sons, and poisoned every room she walked into. But when she finally passed, her children had the last word. And that word, it's now etched in stone, literally. This is the story of the most chilling revenge ever carried out posthumously. If you've ever dreamed of getting justice against someone who used their power to tear you down, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready. Because today's story will make you believe in karma carved in granite. My name is Amelia, and for as long as I can remember, my mother's voice was the soundtrack of my self-doubt. She didn't need to raise her hand to hurt me. Her words did the damage just fine. She had a special gift. She could make a compliment sound like an insult, and an insult sound like gospel truth. Your sister is prettier. Why can't you be more like her? No man will ever love you if you don't lose weight. You'll never amount to anything with that attitude. I was only 10 years old the first time she told me I was a disappointment. Imagine carrying those words like stones in your pocket. Stones that drag you deeper into the water every time you try to swim toward happiness. It wasn't just me. My sister Emily bore the same weight. But while I shrank into myself, Emily lashed out. She rebelled, searching for love in all the wrong places, chasing approval from anyone who wasn't our mother. Our brothers. Oh, they were her golden boys. The sun rose and set on them. She laughed at their jokes, bragged about their successes, and forgave their mistakes with ease. Favoritism wasn't subtle, it was a weapon. She used it to divide us, to make sure her daughters never felt like enough. Every holiday, every family dinner, it was the same cycle. She'd shower the boys with praise, then turn to us with sharp little digs meant to cut just deep enough. And the cruelest part, she did it with a smile, as if it were all just harmless fun. But it wasn't fun. It was trauma disguised as tradition. The only reason Emily and I didn't drown in it completely was our father, James. He was the quiet counterbalance to her cruelty. He had this way of making even the most ordinary day feel special. He'd take us fishing on quiet mornings, telling silly jokes just to hear us laugh. He'd kneel down to tie our shoes before school, ruffle our hair and say, "You're perfect just the way you are." He tucked us in every night with the same words. "I love you exactly as you are." 4 years, he was the glue holding us together, the proof that we were worthy of love. But love doesn't always win against bitterness. And kindness doesn't always survive cruelty. When he died, it wasn't just that we lost a father, we lost our anchor. Without him, it was like the walls of our house started closing in. Mom's voice, already sharp, became unbearable. She had no one to temper her anymore, no one to soften the edges. And for Emily and me, the world suddenly felt a lot colder. She outlived him by almost 2 decades. 20 years of her voice still echoing, still cutting, still reminding us of every flaw and every failure. By then the scars had hardened. I buried myself in work, desperate to prove I was good at something, anything. Emily moved states away, trying to find a version of herself untouched by Mom's cruelty. But no matter how far we ran, her words found us. A phone call on a random Tuesday could still reduce me to a trembling child. A holiday gathering could still make Emily want to scream. Strange how damage lingers. You can build a whole life, but one comment, just one, and you're right back in that kitchen at age 10, being told you'll never measure up. When she finally died, I expected something. Relief, anger, maybe even grief. But what I felt was confusion. How do you mourn someone who made sure you never felt loved? The responsibility of updating the headstone fell to us, her daughters. Our father had been buried with the kindest words you could imagine. Here lies James, loving husband, devoted father, constant friend. It was a stone that told the truth. It honored who he was. Now it was time for her name to join his. The stone needed an update. And that's when Emily looked at me and said the words that changed everything. "Amelia, we don't have to lie anymore. Emily's words hung in the air like a secret finally spoken aloud. For so many years we had carried the burden of silence, playing along with the image of a family that never really existed. We dressed up for photos, smiled through holidays, pretended to love a woman who never once showed us kindness. And now, standing in that small funeral home office, staring at the draft of the headstone text, I realized Emily was right. We didn't have to lie anymore. The funeral director cleared his throat. "Would you like me to copy the inscription from your father's side and add similar words for your mother?" His pen hovered, waiting for the list. Beloved wife, cherished mother, kind friend. Words that would live forever in stone. Words that would be a complete fabrication. I looked at Emily. She was twisting her hands in her lap, eyes distant, jaw tight. I knew that look. It was the same one I wore every time I replayed the years of insults in my head. We didn't need to discuss it. We were both done pretending. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not this time." The man blinked, unsure. "Then what exactly would you like it to say?" Emily leaned forward, her voice soft but unshakable. "Just her name." For a moment the room went quiet. Even the air conditioner seemed to pause, waiting. The man's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but he scribbled it down. Just her name. 2 words that carried the weight of decades. As we left the office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. Not joy, not victory, but a strange kind of freedom. For once, we weren't shaping our truth to fit her shadow. We were letting it stand raw and unvarnished. The day of the burial came, and the whole family gathered. My brothers were there, smug in their dark suits, the same golden boys she had worshipped until her final breath. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them expecting the usual ritual. Flowery words, a polished lie that painted her as a saint. They thought they knew what they were about to see. When the cloth was lifted from the new engraving, the words revealed themselves. "Here lies James Bloggs, loving husband, devoted father, kind brother, constant friend. Also Mary." The silence that followed was heavier than any eulogy. You could feel it ripple through the crowd. Confusion, disbelief, the sharp edge of truth cutting through decades of denial. One of my brothers shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. "That's it. Just, also Mary?" he asked, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Emily met his glare without flinching. "That's all she ever was to us." A gasp escaped from one of our aunts. My cousins exchanged awkward glances. Nobody spoke after that because what could they say? The truth was carved in stone, impossible to rewrite, undeniable no matter how much they wished to cover it with polite lies. I stood there, my heart pounding, but for the first time in my life I felt taller. I wasn't the little girl being told she was worthless. I wasn't the daughter begging for approval that would never come. I was a woman finally speaking the truth, and letting the world see it too. She had spent her life making sure we felt like afterthoughts. And now, that's exactly what her legacy became. An afterthought. As people drifted away from the grave, whispering among themselves, I felt Emily's hand slip into mine. Neither of us smiled, but we didn't have to. The stone said everything for us. After the burial ended, people tried to return to normal conversation, but the air had changed. You could see it in the way they avoided looking directly at the headstone, in the way whispers rippled like tiny storms just out of earshot. My brothers, the ones who had basked in her favoritism for so long, couldn't hide their fury. One of them cornered me near the parking lot, his eyes burning with indignation. "How could you do this?" he hissed. "She was our mother." I stared at him, at the man who had grown up being handed love and validation while Emily and I starved for scraps. He had no idea what it was like to be on the other side of her cruelty, no clue what words could do to a child when wielded like a weapon. My voice shook, but it didn't falter. "She was your mother. To us, she was a wound that never healed." He clenched his fists, but there was nothing left for him to say. The truth was right there, carved in granite, impossible to polish into something prettier. For once in our lives, Emily and I had taken control of the story. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying the scene over and over in my mind. The gasp from the crowd, the sharp intake of breath from my brother, the silence that followed. My whole life silence had meant defeat. It had meant swallowing pain, holding back tears, letting her win. But this time the silence felt different. Felt like victory. I thought about my father, about the way he used to smile at us across the dinner table, as if he was silently apologizing for the sharp words our mother would unleash moments later. I imagined him reading that stone, seeing his legacy honored with truth and love while hers stood bare, stripped of falsehood. And for the first time in decades I felt peace. Emily called me the next morning. Her voice was raw, but lighter somehow. "Do you think we went too far?" she asked. Paused, choosing my words carefully. "No, we didn't go far enough. For years she took everything from us. Our confidence, our peace, our voices. Yesterday we finally took something back." There was a long silence. Then Emily exhaled a laugh. Not a happy laugh, but a relieved one. The kind that comes when you finally let go of a weight you didn't even realize you were still carrying. In the weeks that followed, the family stayed divided. Some whispered that we were cruel, that we should have been more forgiving. Others stayed quiet, perhaps because deep down they knew the truth and didn't want to confront it. But none of that mattered to us anymore. The stone wasn't for them. It was for us. Every time I thought about those two words, also Mary, I felt a surge of strength. It was poetic, really. She had spent her life making us feel small, reducing us to shadows of ourselves. And in the end, her legacy was reduced to the very same. Small, insignificant, an afterthought etched in cold stone. For once, justice hadn't come in screaming matches or years of therapy. It had come in silence. In two words that spoke louder than 1,000 lies ever could. Time moved on, but the headstone stayed. Every time I visited the cemetery, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't joy, not even pride exactly, but a quiet assurance that the truth finally existed somewhere permanent. For so long our lives had been shaped by lies. Pretending she loved us, pretending we were a whole family, pretending words didn't leave scars. Now there was no pretending left. Emily came with me one afternoon a few months later. We stood side by side, watching the sunlight spill across the engraved stone. Our father's half glowed with warmth. Loving husband, devoted father, constant friend. Beside it, in sharp contrast, those two unyielding words. Also Mary. "She'd hate this," Emily said softly, almost smiling. "She hated everything about us," I replied, but there was no bitterness in my voice, only a tired kind of truth. "At least this way, she finally gets what she gave." We stayed quiet for a long time. I thought about the little girl I once was, the one who had cried into her pillow at night, desperate for a kind word from her mother. I thought about the teenager who stopped believing she deserved love. I thought about the woman who spent years trying to fill the hollow spaces that cruelty left behind. And I realized that girl, that teenager, that woman, they all finally had an answer. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was honesty. And sometimes honesty is the sharpest form of revenge. When we left the cemetery, Emily squeezed my hand. "We're free now," she whispered. And for the first time in our lives I believed it. In the years that followed, the stone became more than just a marker in the ground. It became a reminder to me and Emily that we were no longer bound by the chains of her voice. Life had a way of pulling us forward, but there were still moments when old wounds tried to creep back in. A cruel comment echoing from memory, a shadow of doubt when I looked in the mirror. And every time I reminded myself, her power over us ended the day those words were carved. Family members eventually stopped bringing it up. Some avoided us altogether, still offended by what they called our cruelty. Others stayed polite but distant, unable to reconcile the image of the mother they thought they knew with the truth we had lived. I didn't waste time trying to explain it anymore. They hadn't been in our shoes, hadn't lived in the line of fire. Only Emily and I carried those scars, and only we had earned the right to decide how her story was told. Sometimes when I visit my father's grave, I talk to him as if he can still hear me. I tell him about the life I've built, about the mistakes I've made, about how Emily and I finally stood up for ourselves. I imagine his warm smile, the pride in his eyes, and it gives me comfort. He was always the one who saw us for who we were, not for who she said we weren't. Honoring him with truth while leaving her with nothing felt like balancing the scales. What surprises me most is the peace that followed. Revenge is supposed to be fiery, a storm that rages until it burns itself out. But ours was quiet, almost gentle in its finality. 2 words that stripped away decades of lies and left nothing but truth. No screaming, no chaos, just silence. And somehow, that silence healed more than years of shouting ever could. Emily and I talk about it sometimes. Do you think people will ever understand? She asks. I always tell her it doesn't matter. What matters is that we understand, that we finally honored ourselves instead of the woman who tore us down. And in that understanding we found freedom. In the end, her legacy wasn't the cruelty she left behind. It wasn't the lies the rest of the family told themselves. It was a simple inscription that will outlast all of us, a final line carved into stone that speaks louder than any memory of her words. Also Mary. Nothing more, nothing less. The cloth fell back from the stone, and in that instant the world seemed to freeze. A hush spread across the cemetery, sharp and cutting, the kind of silence that forces every heartbeat to sound louder. People leaned forward, squinting to read the inscription, expecting flowery words about a life well lived. But there it was, cold and merciless. Here lies James Bloggs, loving husband, devoted father, kind brother, constant friend. Also Mary. For a moment no one breathed. My brothers' faces drained of color, their eyes darting to Emily and me like we had just committed some unspeakable crime. One of them sputtered, "That's it. That's all you wrote." His voice cracked, high-pitched and desperate, as though he couldn't believe the world wasn't bending to protect their mother's image. Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that isn't about joy but about justice finally being served. She looked at him calmly, her voice steady as stone. "That's all she ever was to us." "Mary." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A cousin muttered under her breath. An aunt pressed a hand to her mouth as if words had betrayed her. But no one moved to challenge us, because deep down they all knew. They might have ignored it, turned a blind eye, even excused her cruelty, but they had seen it. They had heard it. And now the truth was staring back at them in black letters carved into granite, permanent and undeniable. My heart thundered in my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was release. Every insult she ever hurled, every time she made me feel like I wasn't enough, every scar she left on Emily's heart, it all collapsed into that moment. For the first time I wasn't swallowing my pain. I was standing tall, my voice silent but louder than it had ever been. My brother opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. What could he say? That she was kind, that she was loving. The words wouldn't form, because lies don't stand against truth carved in stone. The silence that followed was our victory. It was sharp, powerful, absolute. Not a single apology could rewrite those years, and not a single protest could erase what was now eternal. She had reduced us to nothing for decades. And in the end, her memory was reduced to the same. That was the moment I knew the balance had shifted. Not in shouting, not in violence, but in something far more permanent. Justice carved in granite forever. In the weeks that followed, people kept asking me if I regretted it. They wanted to know if maybe we should have shown more compassion, softened the edges, painted her in a kinder light for the sake of appearances. But compassion was the language she never spoke. She left this world the way she lived in it, cold, sharp, and unapologetic. And we simply answered in her own language. What I realized is that revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's just a refusal to bend to lies anymore. For Emily and me, those 2 words on the stone weren't cruelty. They were truth. They were the first time in our lives that we weren't silenced. And in that truth there was freedom. I can't say it healed every scar. Words spoken in childhood echo for a lifetime. But it gave us something even stronger than healing: closure. It let us finally put down the weight we had been carrying for decades. And in that release, we found a kind of peace we never thought possible. Standing by that grave, I felt my father's presence more than ever. His side of the stone glowed with love, with words that captured the man he truly was. And hers stood bare, stripped of falsehood, just 2 words that told the world exactly what she meant to us. Nothing more than Mary. It wasn't about revenge that day. It was about honesty. And maybe, after all the lies, honesty was the deepest revenge of all. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? Do you think Amelia and Emily went too far? Or did they finally do what had to be done? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're new here, subscribe for more stories that prove karma always finds a way. Sometimes loud, sometimes silent, but always inevitable. Until next time, remember, the truth might take its time, but when it arrives, it carves itself in stone.